super excited today because I have an extra special security super friend, Aaron Stanley. He is so awesome. And before he goes in and introduces himself and tells all the details of his life and his ascendancy to running security at Twilio, he's going to tell us about his favorite superhero and why. Go, Aaron.
So I struggle with this question because the superhero question is so divisive. There are so many different ones, and everyone has, their pick. So I'm going to go deep cut, and I'm going to say Triangle Man, and it's because Triangle Man hates Particle Man, but when they get in a fight, Triangle wins, and I think that superheroes should win, and so I'm going with Triangle Man.
Okay, so I double dog dared the audience last week to beat Eli Kahn on his answer of Wolverine, and Aaron just threw the smackdown with Triangle Man. First of all, they might be giants. I mean, listen. Hey, I was listening to them in the '80s, so I mean, that was just after I quit playing Dungeons and Dragons. So I mean, Aaron, you've killed it. But hey, look, this is all about you and you telling your story and helping those people who are up and coming understand, what's ahead, particularly since Twilio is really the top 1% of 1%. But you've got a great story, and I'd love for you just to share with folks, how did you get here from your humble beginnings to, your awesome stardom?
Well, as you well know, Rich, I am constantly trying to upset the balance and do the things that I'm not supposed to do. And so if I think way back to the beginnings, I didn't want to graduate high school and go to college, but I did. I didn't want to be a technical person, but I was, and I continue to be. I didn't want to go to law school when all of my friends were going to law school, but ultimately I did that too. And I didn't want to move to California, except that I ended up here as well. And so through these series of poor choices in my mind, I've had a significant number of awesome opportunities. So like I said, I studied political philosophy in college, but I worked in one of the college computer labs. And so I sort of honed my technical chops and did that kind of stuff on the side for money. And then when I graduated and all of my friends were going to law school, I decided I wanted to actually work, and I went into consulting. I went to a think tank in DC and had a lot of fun kind of thinking about technology problems and privacy and computer theory, less the actual practice, but ultimately got pulled back and became a security person, was setting up firewalls and hardening systems, looking at intrusion detection and trying to do incident response for a hospital network. And as I kind of grew into that side of the house, I learned about forensics, going and doing investigations on a phenomenal scale, and became a consultant doing forensics. And then I burned out. And when I burned out, I mean, I did what I thought anybody in my position would do, and that's take a 3-year vacation and go to law school. So I went to law school. I learned, how to think differently. And then I moved out to California because I didn't want to go back to work in New York. I didn't think that it was right to join a law firm and have another extraordinarily high pressure, high hours job, and came out to California to take it easy, build a business, think about what people needed, and use both sides of my head, the technical and the non-technical. And then I got this crazy opportunity at a crazy company that I had admired since the beginning of time that I can remember, and got an opportunity to interview at Apple. And so I took that job. I did an incident response. I grew into sort of engineering leader and built systems for legal electronic discovery. And basically, I mean, I'll tell you kind of the way that things happened is every so often an opportunity would come up. Somebody would say, hey, wouldn't it be great if? And I would say, yeah, that would be great. Let me go do that. I volunteered. And so just volunteering for these interesting projects or opportunities led me to grow my career at Apple, manage a bunch of teams, some amazing people, build some really big systems. And then I came to Twilio and sort of did it all over again with the security team here, and continue to this day to say, wouldn't it be great if, and then go make it happen. You got muted, Rich.
That's awesome. You're one of two lawyers turned CISOs, and that's a great story. So I'm going to go now dive into the technology stuff a little bit. And so, Twilio's ostensibly, they're an API company, right? They provide APIs that make communications great, easy, simple, very developer-led, right? And you could probably tell a better story about that than I can. But I want to know, from your perspective, what makes API security different than other security, or is there a difference?
So first off, yeah, Twilio is definitely an API-forward company, but we're also a software company. We also have web applications. We also have hardware. We're a pretty amazing, I think, overall communications company. But we did get our start in the API world, and we tend to know a lot about how APIs function. I didn't coming into this company. I mean, I was much more traditional, quite frankly, came from really the world of like dead disk forensics, not even a cloud world. So I've had to learn a lot, and I'll tell you what I've learned. APIs are fundamentally different from securing other applications because APIs are designed for computers to interface with them. And so a lot of the tools and a lot of the tactics that we use as security professionals to understand anomalies and patterns don't necessarily flow to APIs. We can't just put a bot detector on an API and say, distinguish human from non-human and accept the human traffic and reject the non-human. But you can do that when you're an e-commerce platform and what you want is people to come to your website and click in weird ways and go through captures. But APIs make that really, really difficult. And so it becomes really hard to protect an API from bot attacks, from the distributed credential stuffing attacks, from massive brute forces. You have to come up with unique methods to identify bad traffic for yourself, knowing what you know about how people function and utilize your APIs. Secondly, we are a public API. And so while we may have certain things that you can do with our API, if you're a beta partner and they may not be documented, almost everything about us is documented online. You can go and you can see if you send us a response that looks like this, then, or if you send us a packet that looks like this, you should get a response that looks like that. And so it makes it really easy for an attacker to do the reconnaissance that they need to do in order to figure out where the weaknesses are in our stack. So we're all out there, and that makes for a really awesome challenge trying to secure that environment that is both open and designed for machines.
All right, so that sounds difficult, right? And forensics, of course, you said it's, disk forensics going on. Forensics is one of the most technical things out there. So you're getting pretty well-rounded. So now the challenge, I think, is, how do you apply security in what I think is one of the most dynamic software development environments in the world? If you've read anything about Twilio, they're pretty passionate about small team-based development. Maybe you can spend a little time, first of all, explain to the audience what that is, right? And then talking about the challenges and opportunities from a security perspective in working in that sort of context.
Yeah, so core to Twilio's DNA is innovation. And in order to grow a company and have products that are both extraordinary scale and extremely feature rich and complex, you need your engineering teams to continuously innovate, build new products, build new features, and push them out. So we push things out really fast. but we also try very hard to incentivize innovation within the company so that we don't stagnate. And one of the ways to do that is to make individuals or really small groups of people accountable for the feature getting into production and accountable for the results and sort of customer delight that it provides. So we've tried as a company to keep our engineering teams small so that they're quick and they can release features that people actually want to use, and we don't lose the kind of bureaucracy that happens in large companies where you have to have sign off for decisions by this person, then this person, then this person, and it takes a really long time to actually launch something unique, innovative, market leading. So that obviously creates tough challenges for security. It means that we have to be operating really fast. If our engineering teams are pushing things out with hundreds or thousands of deployments every day, that security has to be baked into the pipeline. It can't just be only at design phase or only at a static code scanner or only at a firewall or a RASP or something like that. It has to be embedded into every single part of our development lifecycle. So it's difficult. It means that we have to leverage a lot of automation. We have to build a lot of tools ourselves. And we have to make sure that when our engineering teams are innovating, that we've given them guardrails. So they can play in a path and sort of swim in a pool and do a lot, have a lot of freedom, but that there are certain lines they can't cross. That allows them to operate effectively. It allows us to ensure that the really important controls won't get violated. So that's sort of the balance that we've had to strike, and we're continuously trying to strike it. Obviously, the other thing that happens when you have lots of little teams that are incentivized to innovate is they get to choose a lot of different functions, different languages, different tech stacks. They can experiment with things, especially we're heavily leveraged in AWS. So every time a new AWS feature primitive comes out, a team can say that that's probably the better way to do what we're trying to do. And so we have to stay as ahead as we can. Generally, we're trying to react to what the teams are doing, but we have to keep abreast of all of the different options that the teams have as they move through and try to do what's right for the customer.
Great. That makes a lot of sense. Sounds complex. So let's talk a little bit more about complexity at Twilio. I think it could be said that Twilio is one of the first generation cloud native security platforms, right? But cloud native now is becoming much more ubiquitous. We're seeing backend as a service, functions as a service, serverless, and what have you, and of course Kubernetes. So where is Twilio on that spectrum of cloud native, right? Are they leaning heavily into more of the modern stuff, like, again, functions as a service, Kubernetes? And that, if so, what has that transition meant for you as a defender?
Yeah, man, we don't have enough complexity in the world, do we? I said before, Twilio is a software company in addition to an API company now. And if you look at some of the software offerings we have, it's all serverless. Whereas we had a huge fleet of EC2 instances, and we still do, to serve the legacy products that we continue to provide. The newer stuff is not that way. It's how can we leverage the serverless platforms? How can we do an application purely in code so that we don't have to worry about things like, what's the CPU utilization of that box? Is the memory pressure getting too high? We don't have to worry about garbage collection, which I know most engineers from working in a big Java shop before when I was at Apple are constantly talking about. So just being able to leverage some of those new technologies has allowed us to move really, really fast. It's also, of course, opened up new questions about how security works in the serverless world. What happens when a bunch of AWS customers are using Lambda. Is it possible for Lambda data to spill over into other places? And how do we show AWS where those things are and where they're happening? There's been a lot of really interesting work within Twilio and certainly without that leverages those platforms in a way that really helps our teams. The other thing is containers, of course, which have been big for a while. And I think the thing that I learned when coming to Twilio, the one thing that shocked me the most was when I started out, I knew that it was a Linux shop and most of the infrastructure was Linux. But there's still some stuff that I was surprised by in terms of infrastructure that was not running on Linux, and what was it running on, and why was it there, and what does a bunch of Windows machines in an environment like that actually mean? So trying to manage those types of, they're really like hybrid environments, I was surprised at how there was some old, in my opinion, hardware and software stacks in the company that didn't make a lot of sense. As I started to really talk to people and understand how the company got to where it got, I realized every decision has a really good reason behind it, that many things have been fought over and argued over, and we continue to stand by the decisions that we've made, and we'll hold them. And when we don't, we change. But because the company grew up in the very beginnings of AWS, we made a lot of choices around technologies that we were going to adopt and things we were going to build that we now come to rely on, that there's an alternative to. The question, of course, becomes, is the switching cost worth it? Are you going to get more out of the new thing? So whether it's Kubernetes or EKS, the Amazon version of it, or your own Kubernetes cluster, you have to make those decisions and then pay the switching cost. And so as we as a company start to evaluate, when are we going to do that? Are we ready to make that to pay that tax? We're moving things, but it's happening very slowly. So it's a technology that the company is interested in, is working towards, is leaning into. But it is one of those things that's like, well, we made a lot of good decisions. Like, we're where we are because we made a lot of good decisions in the past. So let's be very careful about making a different decision now and really understand why we're doing it. That said, there is a lot, I think, that we could talk about in terms of how do you run a modern stack and be resilient in the cloud without doing it in a containerized way. I don't think you can anymore. Like, I don't think it's, at least from the security team's perspective, I think it is impossible for us to maintain good security practices across, a hybrid cloud environment where you have Oracle Cloud, Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, Ali Cloud if you're doing business over there. You have probably stuff in either in an office or in a data center where you have lots of different environments that you have to secure. So one of the sort of big promises that we have is that a container structure will solve a lot of the security headache because it kind of neutralizes the platform layer. And if you can secure the platform, you're good.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And obviously, I agree with that last sentiment. So real quick, shared responsibility model. You guys are, lots of cloud, lots of AWS based on what I just heard. And obviously you're right, you're over the top, right? You're over the top in terms of communications. Really, a lot of it's about communications. But I'm just curious about the shared responsibility model. You've outsourced a lot of stuff to cloud, all the way up to functions, right? So you're still responsible for some of the, data and other things. And then you have communications. Tell me a little bit about that. What you, as a risk leader, what do you guys think that you own between cloud and the communications infrastructure versus other? What are the things that you like, okay, this is us. We own this. We have to be really good about securing this other stuff. we believe is either shared or completely on their shoulders?
I think it's a good question that I struggle with, and I know our customers struggle with because they ask us about it quite a bit, and it comes up a lot. And I think that if we look at our relationship with AWS as a platform, there's absolutely a shared responsibility model there. We rely on them to take care of physical security of the environment, right? I'm not going to worry about whether or not AWS has biometric locks on the server room doors. I'm not going to worry about N+1 cooling and all of the other things that you need to worry about if you're running a physical plant. I am going to worry about whether or not they have implemented their virtualization layer appropriately. And then I'm going to build on top of that in a way that makes any issues that they might have with that layer minimized as much as possible, right? And I think in the same way, we want to provide a secure platform for our customers, but also make sure that they know that certain things we can't protect from. Usernames and passwords is a good one, right? We can give you a password policy that doesn't allow you to set an insecure password, but we can't stop you from writing it on a piece of paper and posting it with your username in your front window and having anybody who walks by see your username and password. Similarly, we can't secure your computer from somebody coming in and utilizing your credentials to get access to our platform. So to the extent that there are things that you own, you have to maintain the security of them. To the extent that there are things like the data that you pass through our platform, that as it's in our house, as it's under our control, is certainly the thing that our customers trust us to secure. So you ought to know that if you give us an SMS message, for example, that as it transits through our network, it's not going to be intercepted by somebody that isn't a part of the company. You should know that when it's stored for your use, it's stored for your use and not anybody else's use, outside of course, law enforcement requirements that we might have. But yeah, you should be able to trust us with the transit and the storage of that data, and also have some responsibility for the sanctity and safety and security of your own account. So I think that's how I've been thinking about it. As we grow as a company and as we think about taking on workloads that are even more sensitive from the ones that customers are using us for right now, we are pushing the pace, trying to think, how do we do that better? How do we make it so that even if there was a bad actor inside our system that was able to see a message and transit through our environment, how would we prevent that bad actor from reading it? And those are the questions that I'm starting to answer, and we're starting to think about how we're going to deal with that. We've rolled out a couple of features over the last few months that give that security over to our customers. So one of them is that you can give us an encryption key that we will encrypt any recordings that you store with us with. We don't have the private key, you do. So you should be the only one that can decrypt those recordings. I think that's the gold standard. That's the ultimate. We should be able to say everything that you give us is encrypted in a way that we couldn't read it if we wanted to. We would love to be in that position at some point.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I was talking to a potential customer that's in the kind of 911 aggregation business. I didn't ask them whether or not they use Twilio. I'm just going to assume that they do. But it becomes an interesting web of risk, right? Here's a service that is supporting, it's life or death sort of stuff, right? And they're reliant on services like yours or competitors, right? And so the idea of shared responsibility, third and fourth party risk, I think it's incredibly interesting. I think it's still a nascent space, and I'm sure with your legal training or however your brain changed through that process of your education, I can only imagine it's quite fascinating. And I can imagine that the types of people that you want alongside this journey with you, the types of employees you want, you probably need some fairly special skill sets. I'm just wondering, maybe you can talk about, the types of people that you're looking to hire. And this is, again, going to be for those listeners who may be either earlier in their career in security or looking to make a switch, and or, maybe they're far along, they're looking for something new, challenging, and completely different. So maybe you can just shed a light on what you're looking for and what you would value.
Absolutely. We hire all different types of people because we have so many different types of functions to perform. And so there's no like single answer for it. But what I do really value when I'm interviewing candidates, and I love interviewing folks across the spectrum, senior people, junior people, it doesn't matter, it's all fun, because my interviews are really about getting to understand how they make decisions and how they analyze really either wacky data or massive quantities of data. Because in security, a lot of what we do is very similar to what you do in the law. You have a set of rules or ways you think the world ought to work, and then you have a set of facts, and you have to match the rules to the facts and figure out what's weird, like what's an anomaly, what's an outlier, or if we make this decision today, what rules are we violating, or what things might happen in the future? So when I talk to people, I tend to ask them a lot of questions about how stuff works, going as deep as they can into how it functions, so that I can get a sense of how they analyze a problem and pick it apart, and what stands out to them as important details. And then we talk a lot about patterns and sort of designing things, thinking about, if you were going to build Facebook today, what choices would you make? And so I'm really interested in candidates for roles across the spectrum who show a significant amount of interest in the detail, who are really passionate about thinking about these problems. I'm not saying you have to I'm not saying there's a right answer or a wrong answer to any of them. But if you work with me and think things through with me, it becomes a really fun exercise and a fun interview. So that's sort of the soft side of it. The harder side is that, the reality is, even for kind of entry-level technical positions, I still want people to have a fundamental understanding of the technical universe. So you need to understand the basics of networking and the basics of systems. So if I'm going to ask questions about internet, like, tell me how, when I type into my browser, something becomes a web page that I see, and talk to me about the technical elements that you understand about how a page gets rendered in a browser, because that fundamental understanding is what's going to give you the ability to look at a packet capture and pick out what's happening in the stream of communication, or to work with a user in the company who says, weird stuff's happening on my computer and these windows are popping up. If you're going to help troubleshoot and determine whether or not that's related to malware, you need to understand why those things might happen. So this is like, honestly, the hardest part about hiring at that level, because you don't necessarily learn those things in SDS program or really in school at all. You kind of have to play around and be intellectually curious enough to ask those questions, set up a lab, play with stuff. There's no silver bullet program that I've found that if you have this certification, or if you have gone to this school, you will be successful, because these are things that you have to want to do and play around with.
That's great. We're going to ask one more career question for the audience here. For the burgeoning security leader, for those particularly who want to go where the action is, right? Call it cloud native, cloud, et cetera. What advice might you make for those who aspire to the security, head of security, CISO-ish, et cetera? What might you tell those people, other than run for the hills? What might you tell them?
I say the exact opposite. I think my answer is don't say no. Now, there, my team would hate me for saying something like that. I mean it very specifically. Uh, Within the context of the work that we do, we have to say no. We have to prioritize what we do and what we don't do. We have to focus our time, and that's the hardest thing, is to say, what's the most important, the riskiest risk that I could fix today? Let me go fix that one, and let me not try to fix the other things. Um, People have talked about it in terms of which fires are you going to let burn? You know they're there, but you have to. So I'm not talking about prioritizing your time. I'm talking about sort of what I talked about before. Like, interesting things are going to come up, and if you come from a default position of saying no to something new, then you're likely to miss a really good opportunity. So I take a page out of the Second City handbook, and you kind of want to say yes and. So yeah, you can go, like, you do that crazy thing, and do all of these other things also, and figure it out, because it's in the figuring it out that you start to understand how to best prioritize. You start to leverage technologies that make your life easier. You start to think, well, what if I could script that? And then you say, I don't know anything about scripting. So you go learn something about scripting, and that helps you. So you're sort of gathering all of these skills that you need to ultimately be successful, because you're not running away from challenges and opportunities. So I think that's important, and that is a big part of how I am doing all of the crazy things that I'm doing. I think as well, like this, you need a support network. You need a support network within the work that you do, like within your team. You want a team that is going to stand by you and support you and have your back. But it's also incredibly important to have a support network outside of your company. People that you can speak honestly to, openly to, that you can ask questions that you might not want to ask your direct manager, because you don't want to seem like you don't really know what you're talking about. So you need those people to help you think through ideas and workshop stuff. And then you need to come to your leadership with ideas and propose something crazy that you want to go do. So I always look for that in people who are the rising leaders in the organization. Those are the ones that are coming and saying, wouldn't it be great if? And you go do it.
That's awesome. You heard it here, folks. Just say yes to everything. No, that's not it. That's not what Aaron said. That's a really great answer. And actually, I couldn't agree with you more. Listen, for companies who are, dev first, who are competing on velocity, who are competing on innovation, I think it's our job to figure out how to, clear the way and then get out of the way, right? Our job is to, to be almost like developers helping developers. So to figure out how to put a lid on the risk in a developer first way, as opposed to saying, no, just stop, don't do that. You won't be long for this life as a CISO if you're in the house of no, so to speak. So Aaron, you've been super duper generous with your time. You truly are a super friend. I love Triangle Man, by the way. Again, I'll just say that was a fantastic answer. And for those of you, just watch Aaron. He's more than a rising star. He's at a great company, and I expect to see, continue to see great things from him. Thank you again, Aaron.
You're very welcome. I am happy to share my personal opinions with you, not the opinions of Twilio or its subsidiaries, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, I do have a JD.
There you go. Awesome.